Okay, so we didn't learn last week because we had a wonderful siyum. So where are we? We're holding in Perek Tes. Is that right? 1 second. I'm sorry, Perek Yud. You're correct. Yeah, Perek Yud. Yep. Yeah, so again, as I say, this particular part of the Even Shleima is a bit difficult because the Even Shleima as a whole is taken from many, many Sfarim. It's not a sefer of the Gra himself. And although Mishlei is the main thing, but there's a lot of Likutim from Tikkunei Zohar, from Sefer Yetzirah. The Vilna Gaon wrote many, many Perushim on Kabbalah. And the problem is the statements contradict each other all the time. Now, on some level, the idea is, as Chazal say, Divrei Torah aniyim b'makom echad v'yashirim b'makom acher. Words of Torah are poor in one place and rich in another place, meaning you got to supplement. So theoretically, you have to bring everything together. But sometimes it's very, very difficult. So like one paragraph will say something, and then another paragraph will say something else. And how do you match them up? It's actually very, very difficult. If you remember, we were looking in Perek Yud, Sif Yud Aleph, where we were talking about the different judgments that happen to a person when they die. And just to remind you, because there were 3 terms that were introduced here, which are really from Kabbalah, but the Gra uses them a lot in this parak. 3 types of onshim. There is first what is called chibut hakever. The second is dina ditolata. The third is kaf hakela. And the fourth is Gehinom, which means you have to undergo, not you, all of us have to undergo a purification process before we even get to Gehinom. You think Gehinom, you'd figure, is open admissions. I mean, you don't need any standards to get to Gehinom. The answer is yeah, you're not ready for Gehinom yet. You got to go through certain things that are pre-Gehinom purifications, so you could be zocha to the purification of Gehinom. Remember the Yesod of Gehinom. The Yesod of Gehinom is, although it's obviously very, very awful, but the Yesod of Gehinom is to purify your neshama, so you will be able to get Olam Haba for the mitzvahs that you've done. This was an earlier point the Gra made. The Gra made the point that Hashem in His Rachamim has created a very asymmetric system. The punishments for Aveiros are limited in duration, and the reward for mitzvahs are unlimited in their duration. So the pshat is, a person gets Gehinom, but Gehinom, b'derech klal, is never more than 12 months. No, b'derech klal, right? So what turns out is, what happens to the Rasha, Gomor, after 12 months of Gehinom? He gets Olam Haba for the few mitzvahs that he may have done. Now, obviously, it's not going to be as great. Even in Olam Haba, there are levels. So, obviously, the Rasha who gets his Olam Haba for a few things is not the same Olam Haba as the tzaddik who served Hashem Kol Yemei Chayav, for sure. But it's Olam Haba, nevertheless, even though it'll be on a lower level. So think about it. It's quite an amazing chesed. The Einish for Aveiros is Mugbal by Zman. The reward for mitzvahs is not Mugbal by Zman. So Gehinom is the purification mechanism. By the way, it was interesting. Gehinom, of course, Gei Ben Hinnom is its full name. It's actually a part of Yerushalayim. It's mentioned in the book of Malachim, the valley of Ben Hinnom. And this was a valley in which the people who were over the Avodah Zarah, both the Canaanites and if Jews were doing it, they would sacrifice their children through Molech, through fire. And it became, therefore, by the time of Chazal already, it became identified as the entrance to the ultimate punishment for Aveiros. So there's a wedding hall. I went to a chasna a few weeks ago, which was located in Gei Ben Hinnom. So and you have to walk across. You have to walk across a rope bridge. A little bit. It's interesting. Have you done that? Yeah. You're walking on this rope bridge, and it says, "This is the way to Gehinom." Gay Ben. You think as you're walking the bridge, the way to Gehinom. A bit of a graphic picture. But anyway, this is why you need some purification before you can even go to Gehinom, because Gehinom is where your neshama gets polished up and repaired, and therefore able to absorb olam haba. Because a neshama that's damaged with chatayim cannot absorb the light of Hashem. It's like you're a receptacle full of holes. Anything you pour in would go out. So Gehinom is like fixing us up. It fixes us up, and Memela, we're then able to receive the Or Hashem. So there are 3 stages the Gra mentions that are pre-Gehinom stages. Stage number 1 is called Chibut HaKever. Now Chibut literally means to bang, lachbot. For example, aravos. When you hit aravos and Hoshana Rabbah, that's called Chibut Arava. So Chibut HaKever literally means being smashed in the grave. And obviously we don't know exactly how we experience that because we're not physically alive. We're not physically alive at that point. But that means every single aver of the body is kind of punished for the sin that was done with the aver. So things that you did with your hands, this finger will get twisted or whatever it would be. Things that were done with the legs, things that were done with the ears, the eyes. Meaning Chibut HaKever seems to be an individualized type of Yisurin that is correlated to the Avarim, which did particular Averos. Now, what does that mean, let's say, for things that involve the brain? For example, a person might have thoughts of kfira, right? So the sin I did was with my mind. Maybe severe anxiety. I'm not clear exactly how the model of Chibut HaKever would play out. But that's the first stage of pre-Gehinom Onesh, and that is called Chibut HaKever. The unease within the grave itself. The second stage is tolas, and that simply refers to the physical phenomenon that the body gets consumed by maggots or worms or whatever it would be. And although we might think from our perspective it's a dead body and there's no particular suffering there, but apparently the neshama is margish, a suffering in the din of the talas, rima v'seleya, and that's dina de tolata. And the third is called kaf hakela. Now, kaf hakela is literally a slingshot. Kaf hakela, right? Let's say you, like David killed Goliath with kaf hakela. And this refers to the idea that your neshama is thrown, just literally, from one end of the world to the other end of the world, like a stone in a slingshot, thrown back here, thrown here, thrown here, thrown here. And obviously, in a spiritual sense, there would be a sense of not belonging anywhere, not finding any rest, being in a state of unease, perpetual wandering. Just like Cain, right? At the very beginning, Cain described his predicament after his sin as I am a nav and nad bi'aretz. I am a person who will wander. Now, even though the Pashut Pshat is, he's just talking about the fact that he has to wander around because people want to kill him, etc. But all of the Mefarshim understand nav and nad to refer to the psychological feeling that I'm no longer connected to Hashem, so I have no place here. I have no place. Wherever I go, I feel I don't belong. And kaf hakela, which is literally described as a slingshot, presumably is the hergish of the neshama in the pre-Gehinom stage, that he doesn't know where he belongs. And indeed, in near-death experiences, to the extent they're valid, we don't necessarily know. People often describe, eventually they have the glory, the beauty, and everything else, but they often describe a sense of not knowing where you belong, because the soul actually sees the body there and actually thinks it's part of that, but it's not part of that. And that's what kaf hakela is. So these are the 3 dinim. We have chibut hakever, we have dina de toilata, and then we have kaf hakela. And after we go through those things, and the Gra does not tell you how long are those things. Are they 1 day, 3 days, 2 months, right? There's no particular schedule that's given here. But then you get admitted, we get admitted if we need it, to Gehinom. And from Gehinom, Bezras Hashem, we eventually graduate, we hope, to Olam Haba. Yeah.
So couldn't in theory Gehinom go past a year's time if they have all these 3 stages to fill up the beginning of, let's say, your time than when you passed away, when one passed away?
I'm sorry, say again, didn't hear you.
If one passed away and then he has, let's say, 10 days of these 3 stages,
Yeah.
wouldn't his Gehinom in theory could go past a year's time?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Unless we're going to say maybe that the first 3 stages maybe are included in Gehinom. In other words, Gehinom is both a specific thing and maybe a generic term for all of the tsaros that befall a person after they die. So it could be that maybe in the 12 months, we might include those first 3 stages as well, yeah.
How does the Kavakilla bring tikkun from the shomer so that it can get admitted to Gehinom?
Yeah. So it's hard to know because the truth of the matter is, the way I described Kafakela is the way some Sfarim describe Gehinom itself, and that is the sense of not being connected, which is the awful, awful pain of the neshama not being connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When it talks about the fire of Gehinom. Now, obviously, the fire of Gehinom is not a physical fire because the neshama is not a physical entity. You can't burn a neshama with fire. But fire refers to a longing that cannot be satisfied. Like a person might say when they're thirsty, it's like my throat is on fire. And the idea is that the neshama wants his dapkus Hashem. And in Gehinom, it does not feel any connection to Hashem at all. And therefore, that's called a fire. That's the awful fire of Gehinom. In a sense, Kafakela is somewhat similar in the sense of not belonging anywhere. But again, it's suffering. In other words, the way it's masakin a person for Gehinom is that it's a form of great Yisurin. This is Yisurin of the neshama. The neshama wants to belong. The neshama wants to be connected. When the neshama is not connected, we can't imagine the pain. We don't imagine. The Baal HaTanya talks about this again. It wasn't his chiddush. In Igeres HaTshuva, the Baal HaTanya has, in the 3rd part of Tanya, is a letter that he wrote about tshuva, doing tshuva. So he writes that the neshama is imprisoned in the guf. The neshama wants to be connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the guf limits the connection, and the averis limit the connection much, much more than that. And we don't realize the unbelievable because we're not conscious. We're not consciously connected to our neshamas. We know it's there, but we don't really know what the neshama is feeling. And he says the neshama's pain is indescribable. That it wants to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's imprisoned. Ad Kedei Kach, that the Baal HaTanya writes, in fact, it's very, very interesting. At one point in the Tanya, he writes something very bekitzer, and says, I don't want to explain this. If you know what I'm talking about, you know. If not, not. He says that in many, many ways, a tzaddik doesn't even want to live in this world. The tzaddik wants to die. So the neshama will be freed and connected to God. So why does the tzaddik stay in the world? Out of avas Hashem. Their love for Hashem is so great that if Hashem gave you a mission to be in this world, you'll stay in this world no matter how hard it is, because that's the Ratzon Hashem. Then he said, I don't want to be marich in it. But it's a very amazing thing, right? We have the opposite attitude, right? I want to live. Bezos Hashem, we want to live. He says, no, the tzaddik wants to die, actually. But the tzaddik makes a commitment to live, because that's the Ratzon Hashem. They say, the Chidushei Harim, the first Ger Rebbe, Rav Yitzchak Meir Alter, had 10 sons, very chashuv sons, who were big Talmidei Chachamim. And all of them died. In fact, he used to say he was the Rav Yochanan of the door. The Gemara says by Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan had 10 sons who died, and he would carry around a little bone of his 10th son. And when he was trying to be Menachem people, he would say, Din grama da sira bir. This is the bone of my 10th son. How is he allowed to carry it? Isn't there Chi of Kvura? Okay, they discuss it was less than a Kazayas, that technically there was no Chi of Kvura, but he kept the bone. So the Chedushei Rim had 10 sons who died. As his last son was dying, he went to him and said, I know, Mamish V'ta Balatanya says, I know you don't want to live in this world. I know you want to be with Hashem. But Hashem commanded you, V'chai b'hem. So, don't do it for me and don't do it for you. Do it for him. Try to live. Try to live. Because this is what, Hashem wants you to do. Now, I know you might be thinking that this may be seiser a little bit. A Maisa with the Gra, another Maisa with the Gra. The Gra was Nifter Cholamayit Sukkos. Right? The Gra was Nifter Cholamayit Sukkos. I think it was the first day of Cholamayit in Chutz La'aretz, meaning the Yushpizin of Yaakov Avinu, which is the third day of Sukkos, which in Eretz Yisrael is the second day of Cholamayit in Chutz La'aretz. It's the first day of Cholamayit. And the story goes that he was sobbing as he left the world because he lifted up his tzitzis. And he said, this world has something that Olam Haba doesn't have at all. For just a few kopecks, a few pennies, one could be zeicher to such tremendous tevekus b'Hashem, tzitzis. And in Olam Haba, you'll get reward for what you did, but there's no way to do anything. You can't do anything. And what's interesting is that it's like, and we don't know exactly, but some people describe it. It's like a plate of glass. You're in this world, Olam Haba, and you're looking down at the people who are able to learn and able to daven and able to do all sorts of things. And you so much want to be part of that, and you can't. You just can't. You're behind this glass wall where you see things, and you can't be part of it. So that's a little fakir, right? That goes in the direction of, as Pirkei Avos Taka says, that every second in this world is greater than all the wealth of all of us. So really, you see, it's both things are true, because the greatness of this world is the ability to get Olam Haba, which means Olam Haba is greater, but this world is greater because this world enables you to be Kaina Olam Haba, which you wouldn't be able to do once you're there. But all right, so this is so going back. This is a very long answer to your question. Going back to the Kaf HaKela is the anxiety of the neshama that has no rest, that does not feel connected. And that's a tremendous, tremendous pain. Now, how is that different than Gehinom? I actually can't tell you, because the Chorek, that's Gufa Gehinom itself, and yet it is considered to be a distinct stage called Kaf HaKela. So we don't really know the difference in separation degrees between Kaf HaKela and Gehinom Gufa. But these are, again, three terms to be familiar with, just generally. We have Chibot HaKever, we have Dina de Tailas, or Dina de Tolata, we have Kaf HaKela, and then the fourth term is Gehinom. And after Gehinom, even a Russia is Zocha to Olam Haba. Now, I've mentioned this many times, forgive me for bringing it up again, but it's always a perplexing question. That is, there are people who don't have a share in Olam Haba. Right? A normal Russia, even if he does a lot of Averos, does have Olam Haba after Gehinom. And that's what the Rambam says b'Feirish, that a Russia is Nidan b'Gehinom, and then he goes to Olam Haba for his mitzvahs. But there are certain behaviors or certain attitudes in which a person is mafsid Olam Haba. Many of them, by the way, are not Averos so much as not being Maimin in Ikrei Emunah. So I always raise this question, but once again, every time it comes up, I raise it again. That is, what happens to people who don't get a share of Olam Haba? Do they have these things? Meaning, do they have Chibud HaKever? Do they have Dina de Tolata? Do they have Kaf HaKela? Do they have Gehinom? Because here's the problem. If the purpose of all of these things is to fix up the deficiencies in my neshama, so I'm able to be zochet olam haba. If you have a person who's not going to go to olam haba anyway, then what would the tachlis of Gehinom be? Would it just be, before we destroy you, we want you to suffer? Would that be a cheshbon? Or do you say the other way around? People who are damaged beyond repair just get thrown away. Meaning, Gehinom and these things are ways of repairing neshamas, so they could be zocha to a tikkun. Those who are not capable of a tikkun, which means they don't get olam haba, so l'chayr, they're just thrown into the garbage. Or theologically, what actually happens is their individualized spiritual energy just gets reabsorbed in the infinity of the Ein Sof. Meaning to say, there's no longer a sense of a person as a person. They're gone. They are gone, although their spiritual metzius gets reabsorbed within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it would appear, again, forgive me for repeating it, I know I've spoken about this, it would appear that the notion of eternal damnation does not make logical sense. But people then say, oh, so you're telling me Hitler gets a better deal than, a Jewish Russia. A Jewish Russia has to go to Gehinom and then gets Olam Haba. Yeah. Hitler just disappears, right? Hitler just disappears. That's pretty easy. I mean, he doesn't suffer. So again, in ways we don't understand, apparently, although I'm assuming when a neshama is obliterated, there is no consciousness of that obliteration. Otherwise, it wouldn't be obliteration. It's not that, he's obliterated and is aware of being obliterated. I don't know, maybe, but that seems to be a logical contradiction. But apparently, the apprehension of being obliterated is the greatest akbas nefesh that could exist. The idea that, this person is gone. So the Rambam describes it in Hilchos Tshuva, that the idea of being obliterated is the greatest onesh a person can have. That is why, fear of death is a relatively common phenomenon, and part of it is obliteration. That's the language. Of course, Baruch Hashem, we don't believe most people are obliterated. We believe in the neshama staying, but people are very afraid. They're very afraid of the notion of, when I'm gone, I'm gone. Something to be thinking about, They say Rav Chaim Soloveitchik had a fear of dying, and the way he would overcome it is he would be ma'ayin in Hilchos Tumas Meis, Ayolos. In fact, there are many wonderful chidushim of Rav Chaim in Maseches Ayolos. And he says, by learning the Torah about the Tumah of Meis, the Torah gave him the chama over his anxieties over death. So that's nichlal in Lulei Seiroscha Shashuai Azavadati Bionyi. Without the Torah that was my delight, David HaMelech said, I would be utterly destroyed. Okay, so that's, I think, the last thing that we looked at. But then, one second here. So Gehinom is our last stage, apparently, before Olam Haba. But then, Sif Yud Beis says something totally different. And he says the following: there are 3 stages that pass on a person before they come to Gan Eden. Presumably Gan Eden is the world of the Neshama Olam Haba, although you never really know, but Gan Eden is a synonym for Olam Haba. Remember, don't confuse this with the Chiyas HaMesim. HaMesim is a later thing when the body goes back, when the soul goes back into the body. Right now we're talking about the spiritual world of the soul, and that is Yom Hadin, the day of judgment, Gehinom, and Emas Mavis, and fear of death. Now, l'chaira, he must be going in reverse order. I'm assuming that fear of death is the first punishment you have. In other words, this is referring to when the Malach HaMavis comes and the person is filled with the terror of having to surrender his neshama. That's called Emas Mavis. Then we have Gehinom. So l'chaira here, Gehinom must include, as I said before, Gehinom includes Chibut HaKever, Dinor de Tolata, all of the other stages, Kaf HaKela. So Gehinom includes 4 things. But then that's not yet. So even after you finish Gehinom, there's something else called Yom Hadin. So what's the Yom Hadin? So, Yom Hadin, before a person went to Gehinom, he was judged in terms of his Gehinom. So l'chari, the Yom Hadin is what you might call a final accounting, meaning the following. When a person does mitzvahs and averos, the ultimate judgment is not only about what they did. Because if it's only about what they did, then as soon as the person dies, Hashem can make a final decision. But everybody has ripple effects in their mitzvos and averos. So for example, if you raise your child to keep the Torah, then all of the mitzvahs the child does and his children do and his grandchildren do, ad sof kol adayros, are your zechus, because of you this happens. Moshe Rabbeinu gets the zechus of every single mitzvah every single Jew does. Can you imagine all of that? When you're mezakeh harabim, and the other way around, if chas v'shalom you turn somebody off, then all of the averos of him and his dairos are connected to you. Which means there's a constant reevaluation of your status based on the ripple effects of everything that you've done. So when a person initially goes to Gehinom, he goes to Gehinom based on his cheshbon. Based on your life as of the time of your death, your Gehinom should be 10 months, and afterwards you go to Olam Haba. But apparently, there is a final Yom Hadin, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu then, now, what does it mean, a final Yom Hadin? Because that's a good question too. When is the end of this? What do you mean, final Yom Hadin? It's 100 years after I die. Well, what about the mitzvahs or averos that I caused that are 200 years after I die? So it is said that the final Yom Hadin is actually Techiyas HaMesim. Techiyas HaMesim is considered to be the end of history. So when it's time to be Mechayeh the Mesim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes a final cheshbon, and that may require some more Gehinom, or it may give you a higher madrega in the new Olam Haba of Techiyas HaMesim. Because Techiyas HaMesim is also a form of Olam Haba, except in physical body. So that's called the Yom Hadin HaGadol, which is said to be at the end of history, which is Techiyas HaMesim. So we have the fear of death, we have Gehinom that includes the 3 other stages, and then we have eventually the Yom Hadin HaGadol, which is at the end of time, in which all of the ripple effects are calculated, the mitzvos, the good things, and the like. And in fact, this is the one circumstance. I had mentioned the story of the Gra, where the Gra was crying that there's no way to elevate yourself in Olam Haba, but there is actually a way to do so, and that is the mitzvahs and the ma'asim tovim that people do because of me. Whether it's your children, whether it's your talmidim, whether it's the Kiddush Hashem that you made in the eyes of others. This is one of the selfish reasons, selfish benefits of Kiruv V'Chaikim. One of the selfish benefits of Kiruv V'Chaikim is it's such a tremendous suchus that can elevate your neshama, hundreds, thousands of years after a person dies. They had a connection to that, right? They had a connection to that. And what's interesting is we sometimes don't even know. They have a story. I don't remember all the details, but about a guy from Texas who was a multimillionaire. And towards, when he was older, he wanted to explore Judaism a little bit, so he comes to Israel. And he sees like a Hasidic guy davening at the kotel with a lot of kavana. And he was very, very impressed. So he didn't talk to the guy. He didn't meet the guy, he didn't talk to the guy, he was very impressed. He wrote like a $5 million, $10 million check to some yeshiva. And like 2 days later, he dropped dead. He died very suddenly. And he wrote in his, he had said to somebody, I gave all this money because I saw a true Jew daven to God at the Kaisel Maravi. So people point out, so Bezras Hashem, after 120 years, this Yid dies. He's a good Jew, an observant Jew, davens with Kavanah. And he goes to Olam Haba, and they give him a special place, they say. Because of you, this yeshiva was saved. $10 million because of you. And the guy's he's not going to reject that, Baruch Hashem, but he's going to say, what on earth are you talking about? I never gave the money, I never collected the money. What are you talking about? He didn't even know. Somebody was watching him, and his behavior affected that person. So that's a gift from Hashem when your private behavior can somehow be magnified into such a Kiddush Hashem. But that also creates a responsibility, because if people might see things that you do, you got to be careful that your private behavior doesn't have the potential for Chilul Hashem, right? Can't assume Hashem is watching us. That's for sure. I mean, that's a pashut. But the truth is, even people watch it. People see all sorts of things, and you never know. Okay, so that's called the Yom Hadin Hagadol. So this is an example. Once again, it's a little confusing because the Gemara does not mention Chibot HaKever, Dinor Tolata, or Kafakel. He just mentions Gehinom. But as I say, sometimes when Gehinom is mentioned, it includes those other stages. Okay. Yep. So now I'm going to skip down a little bit where he brings something else. He says that from Gehinom, you then go to Gan Eden. Okay, Gan Eden, the Olam HaNeshamas. But in Gan Eden, you then go upwards. Gan Eden is the entry point. Again, what this actually means, we don't know, but I'm just going to go over the verbal description that he gives. He says, from Gehinom, you go to Gan Eden. From Gan Eden, you go through the 7 heavens. Right? There are 7 heavens until you reach the Kisei HaKavod. After the 7 heavens, you enter a different level of Gan Eden called Gan Eden Ha'elyon. There's the lower Gan Eden, and there's the higher Gan Eden. And you traverse from the lower through the 7 Rakiyas to Gan Eden Ha'elyon. And at each of these stops, you have to give a din v'cheshbon, which apparently means not everybody gets. Maybe very few people get. In other words, you're in Olam Haba, Baruch Hashem. I crossed the border from Gehinom, I'm in Olam Haba. But Olam Haba has many, many madregos. And those madregos can be described as Gan Eden HaTachtain, the 7 Rakiyas, Gan Eden HaElyon. So before you get admitted to a higher stage, there's kind of a judgment, do you deserve that higher stage? Meaning some people might be locked into Gan Eden HaTachtain, some people might be locked in the 3rd Rakiyah. Again, that's still Olam Haba, right? So in order to gain admission to a higher level, you have to be worthy of that. See, because even though Gehinom fixed up your neshama, so you're zeicha to olam haba, but the madrega of olam haba depends on all the good that you've done and also the good that you caused with dorei doros, etc. Right? So that's what we have here. We have Gan Eden Hatachtain, the Shiva Rekiim, Gan Eden Ha'elyain, which seems to be the highest level. Now, you know, if you're familiar with Chabad, Chabad refers, I think, to 770 and the Rebbe's office in particular. They call it Gan Eden Hatachtain. That's the phrase that they use. It's taken from the Zohar, such a Musa, Gan Eden Hatachtain, but they apply it to 770. Well, suffice it to say that that is not the usage of the Gra of that, of that term, for sure. Okay. Now, in Sif Tesayan, he then brings in a new thing called Nahar Dinor. These are two words, Dinor. The river of fire. This is actually taken from Daniel, when Daniel had visions of the Kisei HaKavod in Shemayim. So it talked about Hashem being surrounded with millions and millions of malachim, and a river, imagine a flowing river of fire, flows before him. And that's called Nahar Dinor. And the Gra says here, Nahar Dinor is mafsik bein Eretz Yisrael shel mala l'chutz la'aretz kamo hayarden lamata v'hu Gehinom shel maila v'kaidem shenichnasin l'gan Eden ha'elyain tzarich lavor b'nahar Dinor. Again, this is very, very fascinating and very, very enigmatic. But he says that now he's giving some more explanation. That in Olam Haba too, just like in Olam Hazeh, there is Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. In Olam Haba, there is Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. You could be in Olam Haba in a Bechina of Chutz La'aretz. So he says, Gan Eden HaTachtain and the Shiva Rekiim are different levels of Chutz La'aretz. Nahar Dinor, after you're past the seventh Rakia, there's a river of fire that separates between the highest Rakia and what? And Gan Eden Ha'elyain. And just like the Yarden River separates Chutz La'aretz from Eretz Yisrael, the Nahar Dinor separates Gan Eden Ha'elyain from the Shiva Rekiim. Okay? And therefore, so obviously only the highest tzaddik goes to Gan Eden Ha'elyain. And before you enter Gan Eden Ha'elyain, you must pass through Nahar Dinor, and that is called the Gehinom above. That's a form of, again, purification, meaning regular Gehinom fixed you enough to go to Olam Haba. But for Gan Eden Ha'elyain, you got to be extra fixed up. And therefore, there's a final immersion, so to speak, in the fires of purification of Nahar Dinor that's making the person who's worthy of it, to enter Gan Eden Ha'elyain. Right? So there's kind of a Gehinom Lamala, as well as the normal Gehinom that we say is Lamata. Okay, this is the Nahar Dinor. Okay, so now he says the following. He says, Arba mine hagala yesh. So now he's going to take this purification mashal and go further with it. And he's going to be basing this on how you kasher kalim. Right, when pots and pans absorb non-kosher food, so you have to kasher it. And the reason is because it absorbs the treif. So if I cook in a non-kosher pot, so the treif that's absorbed goes into the food, right? So I got to find ways to purge, get rid of the treif that's in the food, right? These are the dinim of Hagalas Kalim. By the way, as an aside, nothing to do with the Evan Shelaima, Bichlal, there's a little bit of a modern debate regarding stainless steel. And this is an interesting instance of science contradicting halacha. The halacha always assumes, as an ironclad assumption, that except maybe for glass, which is a machlokas, anything metal or porcelain absorbs flavors and tastes from the food. Once porcelain absorbs, it doesn't come out, so you can't use it at all, but everything metal is said to be absorbent, and memela, that's why you have to kosher it before you use it. So scientists have shown that although it's true with old-fashioned iron pots, copper pots, they do absorb, but stainless steel, tempered stainless steel, apparently does not absorb anything. They find on a molecular level there is no molecular transference to the walls of the stainless steel pot. Now, according to that, the argument was made, so do you have to kosher stainless steel? I mean, the whole reason for koshering is because the pot absorbed the treif. If this doesn't absorb it, why do you have to kosher? So there are a few poskim, mainly on the modern side, I wouldn't say, who actually say that stainless steel treif things that we use with treif, or meat or milk, or let's say more realistically, you can use a stainless steel pot for both milchiks and fleishiks, because it doesn't absorb the milk and it doesn't absorb the meat. So it's parov by definition. You can use it without any type of koshering and the like, which scientifically is very, very interesting. Others say, well, listen, if this is how the Chachamim assume that everything is absorbent, then you can't be meshana the halacha based on some scientific understanding of the Metzias, which might be wrong anyway. So that's actually a live machlokas, and so right now it's a real minority position. Meaning, if you'd ask me a shaila, do I have to? Can I use a treif stainless steel pot? We of course would say no, but it could be that over the years, as the science gets more clearer, it might actually be that you can give your child when he gets married, a gift of a stainless steel pots and say, you can use this for milchiks and fleishiks, who knows. Okay. But be it as it may, the Gra is going to use the inyan of Hagalas Kalim, and he says there are 4 ways you kosher kalim. Method number 1 is libun. Libun is literally by using a flame. Again, remember the general rule of kashrus? Kibailai, kach, polte. The way it absorbed is the way it gets expelled. So, if you have a grill or a barbecue spit that absorb directly from heat, without liquids, without boiling, you have to kosher it by direct contact with flame, a blowtorch, or whatever it is. Since it was boleya through fire, you have to kosher it through fire. That's called libun. The second way is hagala b'chamin. Hagala means expulsion through warm water, and that would apply to a pot that you cooked things in, so it absorbed the treif through liquid. So you kosher it by hot liquid, by boiling water in it, and the water takes out all of the treif, right? Kabolo, kachpalto. Now let me point out that in the hierarchy of koshering, you can always use a higher method for a lower. So anything that needs hagala can also be koshered b'libun, because libun is a stronger method. But anything that needs libun, you cannot kosher by hagala. So you could not kosher a barbecue spit or a grill by putting it in boiling water. You'd actually have to have a blowtorch, or the truth is, even the flame of the grill might be a way of koshering it as well, but it has to be directly by a flame. So the first method is libun. The second method, which is pure fire. The second method is hagala, which is a combination of fire and water, because you're using the fire to heat the water. The third method, which is not really koshering, is tevila b'tzonein. You have to immerse things in cold water. Now, this is not really referring to koshering, but this is another halacha, that any food utensils, pots, pans, forks, knives, spoons, that you purchase or received as a gift from a goy, you're not supposed to use until you're tovel them in a mikveh. And that's even if it's new, even if, in other words, even if I don't have to kosher it, because it never absorbed any treif, there is a chiyuv of tevilah. Unfortunately, at least in the United States, there actually, surprisingly, you would think, there are many Orthodox Jews who are literally not aware of the chiyuv of tevilas kelim. For metal utensils that are used for food, this is a chiyuv d'oraisa. Glass is midrabanan. It's metal glass. So wood, plastic, don't have to be table. But metal and glass, you have to be table. You have to be table. It's a chiyuv d'oraisa. Now, b'diavad, if you weren't table and you used it for food, the food is not treif. You can eat the food. It's not like the food becomes treif, but you're not allowed to use it. Now, as a little aside, let me just mention a very common shaila that people have. Let's say a person's parents are not from, but they accommodate. They understand you have kosher, so they give you special kosher food, and everything's kosher, and all the hashgachas are fine, and there are pots and pans that were never used for anything else, right? Everything's great. But the problem is, the last thing they ever thought of, they weren't table the kelim. So, am I allowed to eat the kosher food that my parents made in kosher pots, if the pots were not tabled or the dishes were not tabled? So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach has a very important psak. It's very important for people to know this psak. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says the halacha of the Ramah that until you're table you're not allowed to use is only a kanas on the owner of the kelim who has a chiyuv tefillah. It is not a kanas on a guest or the like, which means I am perfectly allowed to eat off your dishes that were not tabled, because it's not my chiyuv to be tabled then. You see? You're not allowed to eat off your dishes, but of course, if you're not from, you don't care. But the one who's not allowed to eat from untoveled dishes or untoveled pots is the one who owns them, because they have the obligation of tefillah. This is a very, not everybody agrees, but this is a very important psak, because this enables many balei tshuva to eat at with their families without creating too much turbulence with tefillah and all of these different inyanim. Yeah.
Can lechatchila use their pots to cook?
No. I want to say. Let me think about that for a second. So the question is.
They've served me.
No, I understand. In other words, would Rav Shlomo Zalman's heter even apply to permit me to cook in their pots? Actually, I believe yes, but I want to think about it. I believe that he basically says, if the pot does not belong to you, you don't have the isser of shimush. So the same way I can eat off the plate. After all, when I eat off the plate, I'm using it. That would even apply to being allowed to cook, but I'll double check it. Okay. So anyway, the Gra calls that as a part of a hechsher process. So we have libun, we have hagala, we have tevila bitzonein, and then the last thing is kli cheres. For earthenware, porcelain kelim that absorb treif, there is unfortunately no koshering method that's available, because it is so porous that you can never get out all the stuff that's there. So the lashon of the Gemara is shavi rasan mitarasan. The only way you could fix it, not really fix it, is break it. Reminds me a little bit. There was a cute commercial. I was about HP printers. It's kind of the only computer printers you can get in Israel, HP printers, and whatever they break down all the time. There's always like problems with them. So I was looking. I had a problem with my printer, so I was looking for a video how to fix a printer. So it says great thing, how to fix an HP printer. So Baruch Hashem, Hamish, I go to the thing. So they talk about the guy brings in an axe, he like smashes it and throws it out the window. Right, that's how you fix the HP printer. But anyway, so, it didn't help me that much. But okay, but at least it showed me I was not alone in my tsar. But okay. So the thing is, so this is the lashon of Chazal. It's a little sarcastic. Shavi rasan mitai rasan. You fix it by smashing it, meaning you can't do anything. Okay, so we have these four methods. Or four things you do. We have libun, we have hagala, we have tevila, and we have shavira. So now the Gra says the following point. Uchanegdan arba minim. These four methods of koshering or purifying apply to four different types of people. Tzadikim, right? We have four types of people. We have the righteous people. Beinonim, we have the average people. Rishayim, we have Rishayim. So there's only three, right? So who's the fourth category? So here the Gra makes up a fourth category, Bahamim, the human animals. Which means even in Rishayim, we're subdividing Rishayim into Rishayim, and the fourth category are wild animals who are Rishayim, different level. So here's what he says. He says, Uksha ovrin. Now here I don't really understand, because now he's talking about the different things they go through as they pass Nahar Dinor. Now, I don't get it. I really don't get it, because l'chayra, the only people who reach Nahar Dinor are the tzaddikim, because everybody else, even the Rishon, who may get Olam Haba, Taka, but they'll be Gan Eden HaTachton. They're not going to move any further. So here, we seem to have a problem. In the earlier paragraph, Nahar Dinor was said to be the entry to Gan Eden HaElyon, and therefore only the tzaddikim go there. In this shtickle, from a different place, Nahar Dinor seems to be the entry point to Gan Eden HaTachton, meaning everybody, after they leave Gehinom, has to go through Nahar Dinor before they go. It's like a final Gehinom before they go to Olam Haba. So we'll leave it as a question right now, but l'chara, there's a different understanding of Nahar Dinor. So let's see what he says here. So he says the following. He says, as they cross Nahar Dinor to get to Gan Eden, tzaddikim, who are more or less righteous, they are kashered with cold water. It's not cold water, it'd be cold fire, which is interesting. How do you have cold fire? Meaning for them, Nahar Dinor is like immersion in a cold mikveh. Because there's very little lichluch, there's very little filth in them at this point. There never was. So for them, Nahar Dinor, the river of fire, is like mikveh. It's a mikveh of tzonim. Rishayim, for the Rishayim, they have to have libun, very intense fire. So the Rasha is kashered by fire. Now obviously this is a Rasha who gets Olam Haba, right? Because if we're talking about Nahar Dinor is, so we're actually, even the animal ones apparently are B'nai Olam Haba. In other words, we are not talking about people who don't have Olam Haba, because people who don't know Olam Haba never get there anyway. So we must be talking about people who are B'nai Olam Haba, for whatever it is. So the tzaddikim are keneged tevila. The rishayim are keneged libun. The beinonim is hot water, so it's not fire, but it's like hot water, so there's discomfort, but it's not as bad as the rishayim. But then it says, those who are animals, who are that bad, they become kli cheres, and they're holchin le'ibud. They are simply shattered and destroyed because a kli cheres has no takana. Again, the problem is, why would that take place in Nahar Dinor? I mean, that's the thing. What? These people who are not, apparently this last category are identified as people who are not B'nai Olam Haba. That seems to be what he's talking about. So what are they doing there? I don't know. It's very difficult. This was... Yeah, this is taken from Bir Hagra Lakama Agadesh right there. There's different svarim. There was the Gra's Masber, certain Agadata. In particular, many of you might have learned the Agadata of Rabba Bar Bar Chana in Hamecher Sasfin in Bava Basra. Did you ever come across that? Rabbi Bar Chana had these amazing stories, like Lahavdil. There would be like the tall tales of giants and all sorts of unusual things. And superficially, you look at it as just a bunch of Baba Mises, just a bunch of stories. But the Gra has a wonderful, unique parish in which he shows that these are symbolically expressing great sodos in the Torah. In fact, many of you might probably have read Rav Aaron Feldman's book, The Juggler and the King. So go back. The Juggler and the King is an English adaptation of the Be'er Hagra on the Agadah of Rabbi Bar Chana. It literally is going through those Agadah. So you can actually see, at least in English adaptation, what the Vilna Gaon says. So this shtickle here is taken from that parish. And he says that the 4 types of people, Tzadikim, Beinanim, Rishayim, and Behamiyim, are connected to 4 types of kashrus, of kashering something, culminating in Kli Cheres, that Ein Lo Takana Ela B'Shvira. But how it fits with Nahar Dinor is Takashvira. In other words, that's what I'm saying, that the descriptions in one paragraph don't seem to fit the descriptions in the other paragraph. Right? In the earlier paragraph, there's Gan Eden HaTachdain, the Shiva Rikiim, Nahar Dinor, and Gan Eden HaElyon. Here, it seems Nahar Dinor is a stage that everybody passes through, even at the very much lower levels. By the way, I don't know if there's a makar for this. The Baruch Halevi Epstein brings it as a vort. The word Sibor, Kehila, is actually Rashi Tevas, Tzadikim, Beinonim, Urishayim. That in a Jewish Sibor, we have to have everybody, because even the Rishayim we bring to daven to Hashem together. This is the famous Gemara, that one of the ingredients of the Ketairos was chelbana. And chelbana actually did not have a pleasant smell. So why would we include an ingredient in the Ketairos that doesn't smell good? I mean, Ketairos is supposed to smell good. And the answer is because any tiniest sibor that we don't include even the sinners of Am Yisrael is not accepted by Hashem. You have to try to bring everybody in. And this is actually a very, very moving part of the beginning of Yom Kippur. Right before Kol Nidre, we say 3 times, B'yeshiva shel Maila, B'yeshiva shel Mal, the heavenly based in, the earthly based in, Anu Matirin, we declare that it is permitted to daven with the Rishayim. Now let me explain what that is actually. This refers to Rishayim that have been I mean, we don't do it so much today, maybe for good reason, but these are the Rishayim that have been excommunicated from Klal Yisrael. Not allowed to talk to them, not allowed to sit with them, not allowed to be in their Daled Amos. They were so bad that the Kehila said, we have to be marachik them. They're put in chayrim. Put in chayrim. But on Yom Kippur, when we come to Hashem and we beg for mercy, we want to include them as well. So the very beginning of Yom Kippur, we say, even the most unworthy is welcome to come. So we then say to Hashem, you should remember us even if we're unworthy. So that's what that actually is. That's matering the people in Chayrim to come to show and be mishtatif with the minyan. Of course, if they're really bad, they won't come anyway. But hopefully, they'll have Hirhurim of Tshuva on the Yom HaKadosh, and they will come. Okay, maybe we'll stop here. But good Shabbos.